That's fine. Thank you. Before I really begin the sermon, that is, where is Wade? I mean, where is... Okay, all right. I can't find who I want, so all right. Okay, where's Adam? There's Adam. Stand up, Adam. This is Adam Fink. Adam Fink. Now wait. Don't applaud yet. He just stood. He's not done anything here today. Adam is finishing 4 years as our church moderator, which means he has led the CCT for 4 consecutive years. Thank you, Adam, for a job well done. I did that job a couple of times. It's not an easy job, and I think it's worse or harder each year if you want. All right. I've got a little grandson right down there, red-headed grandson, who we'll see how long he can listen to me. Hi, Miles. How are you? All right. A lot of this first part is in the bulletin. I didn't realize it was going to be that. But in 1966, Barb and I and our young daughter, who I would tell you how old she was, but then you'd know how old she is now. We came to Muncie in 1966, where I began my career as an assistant professor of history at Ball State University. Shortly after we moved in, we began looking for a church to attend. We only visited 2. Both were Baptist churches. You see, I grew up a Baptist. I went to a Baptist seminary. I was ordained a Baptist, and I really enjoyed and wanted to continue worshiping with Baptists. And I suspect for some of you here today, the fact that this is a Baptist church is one of the main reasons why you're here. But I also think for many of you, indeed maybe most of you here today, the fact that this is the Baptist church was not a significant part of the reason why you came. You came here, or you continue to come here because you like Wade, and who doesn't like Wade? Are you like Wade's preaching? It challenges you. You like the music we have, either first service or second service. You have friends here, or you made friends here, or you love this beautiful sanctuary. Isn't this something fantastic? I always wish I could remember what I thought when I first saw this anyway. But those are the main reasons why you came, not the fact it's a Baptist church. But this is, as that sign says, this is a Baptist church. And we're very much that. We just don't emphasize that very much. Today, we are. I want to talk to you about Baptists. Not that I think that we are superior to others. I do not think that at all. But if we're going to be a Baptist church, and we are, and if you're here, I think it's good for you to know something about the background of Baptist. I'm going to emphasize 3 things about our background. So I'm being very selective about it. I'm going to talk to you that Baptists stressed believers' baptism only. And that then led to all kinds of discrimination against them. And that discrimination led to them working hard and long for religious liberty, separation of church and state. So that's why I'm going to emphasize those things about us today, if you want anyway. So two passages of Scripture, which should show up here, all right? John's clothes, I'll read from mine. John's clothes were made of camel's hair, and he had a leather belt around his waist. His food was locusts and wild honey. People went out to him from Jerusalem and all Judea and the whole region of the Jordan, confessing their sins. They were baptized by him in the Jordan River. And what I want to emphasize here is confessing their sins, then they were baptized by him in Jordan, in the river. The other passage is Matthew 5. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, anyway. Well, I believe the Baptist church as a church began in the early 1600s in England. I do believe that most of our doctrines, though, go back to the first century. At least I like to think that. And so what we believe is basically first century. But I don't think there's been a line of churches from that time to now that are Baptist churches. I think we began in the 1600s. And most reliable church historians would agree with that. But there are people who differ strongly. And many years ago, earlier in the last century, there were people who began to stress this other theory up here that's going to call the Jerusalem, Jordan, John theory. Now that theory says that Baptists began when John the Baptist baptized in the Jordan River and grew out of the church at Jerusalem. And there's been a direct line of Baptist churches from that time to now. Now, they weren't called Baptist churches, but they had Baptist beliefs all the way through the line. Let me tell you, I thoroughly reject that idea. And when I teach Baptist history, as I have here several times anyway, I sometimes spend a full hour refuting that theory, because those churches they call Baptist were not Baptist in any way I know anyway, and their theology certainly was not, I believe. Anyway. But Baptists began, as I say, in the early 1600s, and what really distinguished Baptists at first was their insistence that baptism was for believers only, that you weren't baptized until you became a believer. And yet, most of the churches at that time, in the early 1600s, practiced infant baptism. Both Catholic churches did, and most of the Protestant churches did. And they've been doing this for years. Now, I'm not an authority on why you baptize infants, but I think I know one of the main reasons. I mean, there may be several others. But one of the reasons, I think, is the belief that if children died before they were baptized, they would not go to heaven. That's a pretty important point, if you believe that. And most of the Christians did at that time. Baptists did not. Baptists said that it's something you do, once you become a Christian, then you are baptized. It's a first act of obedience, if you want. And obviously, Baptists then rejected the idea that children had to be baptized before they could go to heaven. Now, there was these people who insisted on believers' baptism were called Anabaptists. There was a movement earlier in Europe, a century before, an Anabaptist movement there, but these Baptists in England rejected the idea. We're not Anabaptists, they said, because that means rebaptizer, or baptizing a second time. And these people said, no, we are baptizing for the very first time anyway. Thomas Helwys, Helwys, is one of the founders of this very first Baptist church in England. Thomas Helwys, though, got himself into trouble for writing that the King of England was a mortal man and therefore should have no control over the immortal souls of people. That got him in jail, got him in trouble and put him in jail, where he died. But he wasn't hanged, he just died in jail, 1616. A second group of Baptists began in England shortly after this. Baptists have never joined together. We've always had lots of different Baptist groups, and from the very beginning we did. That first group from the Helwys was called the General Baptist, and this second group is called the Particular Baptist. All right? The Particular Baptists followed the teachings of John Calvin. They're called Calvinists. The General Baptists followed the teachings of Jacob Arminius, and they're called Arminian, or that's an Arminian theology if you want. And the two are not all that much alike. Although I must tell you, both the General Baptist and the Particular Baptist did believe in believers' baptism only. And after 1644, they just baptized by immersion. But the point I sometimes like to make is that Arminianism and Calvinism have come down from those very first churches right on down through the time into Baptist churches today and continue to be here. And I believe I can show you, I'm going to try, that you are both Calvinist and Arminian. Or at least some of you are. All right. When I have taught this class, and just a brief class we teach here, I asked 4 questions, and I have the results of 2 of those classes. That's the first question. Sandy's, she's ahead of me. That's fine. This is the first question. Answer A is Christ died for, you take this in your own mind. Christ died for the elect, only the elect are saved. That's answer A. Or answer B, Christ died for all. All can be saved. Don't raise your hand, just think about it. Question 2. Humans cannot resist the grace of God. That's answer A. Or B, the grace of God is irresistible. Is it or is it not? Question 3. God predestined the fall is answer A. Answer B, God did not predestine the fall. It's yes, he did, or no, he didn't. Question 4. Once saved, always saved. That's answer A. B is perseverance is conditional. A true believer can fall from grace. All right? Are you dying to know how your other people in this church voted on this? Let's go back to question 1, Sandy. All right. When I asked this, I had these responses from 2 different classes. 118 was in the class and 126 in the class. Look at that answer. By the way, the A answers always are the Calvinist answer. The B answers are the Arminian answer. Look at that. Strictly Arminian on that question. No Calvinism in those 2 groups at all on that question. All right, let's look at question 2. 6 and 12, 6 said A, 12 said B, 4 said A, 22 said B, if you're reading what I'm had. So in both these classes, we were predominantly Arminian, although not totally that way. All right, question 3. That first group split 9-9. 9 said God did predestine the fall, 9 said he did not. The second group, 15 to 11. 15 said he did, and 11 said he did not. So on that question, we're slightly more Calvinistic. Question 4. Once saved, always saved, or perseverance is conditional. First class, 11 said once saved, always saved. 7 said no. Second class, 21 said yes. 5 said no. We're very Calvinistic on that one. Same people. This was, I don't know when the last time I did this, maybe let's say 15 years ago, something like, I'm not sure. So the point I was trying to make when I asked the question of the class is that we have in this sanctuary, in this church, some Calvinism and some Arminianism. We have shared those right down through the ages, and there you are. I usually say that Southern Baptist churches are a little bit more Calvinistic. American Baptist churches, of which we are, American Baptist Church a little more Arminian. This would show that, but not totally one way or the other. All right. Thank you, Sandy. Both the general and particular Baptists, I say, continued to increase in England in the 1700s, or in the 1600s, 17th century. Both continued to have to pay taxes to the Church of England, that there was a Church of England, an established church, and I don't care what, or who you are, you pay taxes to support that church. And both of these groups were somewhat discriminated against. But they weren't persecuted until 1660. I mean, they discriminated against, but not really persecuted until 1660, when the King of England, Charles II, was put back on the throne. Shortly after he got put on the throne, there was an armed uprising, and Baptists, at least some Baptists, participated in that. It was put down, it was squashed. And so the King of England and those who supported him tried to put down all those who supported the insurrection, and of course some Baptists did. So they attacked, they thought all Baptists were dangerous, and the persecution began then. Baptists, Quakers, and other dissenters are grouped together here. Laws passed by Parliament in 1660 and later for the suppression of Baptists, Quakers, and other dissenters. Here they are. Dissenters were what? They were excluded from public office. They could not hold certain offices. They were excluded from teaching in schools. They were required to attend the Church of England or pay a fine. And then there was this very interesting 5-mile act was passed by itself later on. Clergy were forbidden, clergy or these dissenting groups were forbidden to teach or preach within 5 miles of any town. You didn't know how dangerous we were. So, no question about that anyway. This is our background. Well, during this dissenting time, John Bunyan, you probably heard of John Bunyan. John Bunyan was imprisoned for preaching without the proper credentials and for not attending the Church of England. So he's put in jail. He stayed in the Bedford jail for 12 years. Now, he was given several opportunities to get out, and what they said is, John Bunyan, when you get out, you have to promise not to preach. And he said, if I get out today, I'll preach tomorrow. So he stayed there for 12 years. And while in Bedford prison, he wrote a little book called Pilgrims Progress. You've all read that, or not. Anyway, that's one of the things. John James was a pastor of a General Baptist church in London, and he was forcibly removed from the church, from the pulpit, by justices of the peace, not ruffians, by civil authorities. They removed him from the church and charged him for treason. What had he done? What had he said? He said that Jesus Christ was King of England, Ireland, and Scotland. And for that, he was tried for treason. He was found guilty, and he was hanged. The 30 members of his church were required to sign an oath of allegiance to the king or else be imprisoned. Some signed it, some did not. Anyway. Well, happily for Baptists and Quakers and other dissenters, that acts of toleration were passed in 1689 that lessened some of that persecution. They suffered quite as much in England after that, but they still had to pay taxes to the Church of England, and they still couldn't hold certain offices, and they still couldn't teach in certain schools. In the meantime, Baptists had come to this country. They had migrated to the colonies in America anyway. Those who migrated in the South, primarily to Virginia, were members of the Church of England, which will become the Anglican Church. And they did not come over for religious reasons. They came over primarily for economic reasons. But those who went into the New England area, to Massachusetts, were Puritans. And they did come for religious liberty, for religious freedom, I should say, but not for toleration of others. You might know that anyway. In 1645, well, I should say, the Church of England, the Puritans, both of these established state churches, by the way, are colonial churches. The Puritans wanted to unite church and state together into one. There would be one. There would be no difference anyway. They didn't talk about separation of church and state. They wanted to unify the two. And so they were very much opposed to any other kind of ideas, any religious ideas that were not according to them. And the rejection of infant baptism obviously was considered heresy. And so Baptists were not welcomed in Massachusetts. And indeed, in 1645, there it is, in 1645, the Massachusetts banned all Baptists. They banned them. They couldn't even live in Massachusetts, calling them, look at those terms they got called, incendiaries, infectors, and troublers. When's the last time you called somebody an incendiary or a troubler or an infector? They're just not terms we use very often, but that's what they got called. And the law banished any Baptist, anyone who questioned infant baptism. Baptists did that. If you questioned infant baptism, you were banned from Massachusetts. If you proclaimed Christian pacifism, you were banned. If you denied the state the authority to police your religious convictions, if you say the state has no right to police my religious ideas, if you even said that, you were banned. That's 1645 in Massachusetts. So Baptists no longer were supposed to be there. Now, some of them, of course, defied that, but it was problems if they did anyway. So a few years later after this, by the way, those who refused to do all that would be imprisoned, or they would be fined, or even occasionally they were whipped in public. I could just start this whole sermon with a fellow who, in 1645, was brought out and whipped publicly. 30 lashes he got. What was his sin? He was a Baptist. That's what the problem was. A few years after this 1645 declaration here, the principal of Harvard. Now, Rob went to Princeton, so he loves his bad things about Harvard, but and so did Lisa. The president of Harvard College said, "I no longer believe in infant baptism." Harvard's in Massachusetts. The authorities talked to him, "Please change that view. Change that." "I will not. I don't believe it anymore." And he got released. He was fired. What sin had he done? What had he done wrong? He no longer believed in infant baptism, and that was enough to get him out of his job. Now, Quakers were treated even worse than Baptists, if you can believe that, and you can believe that. I love the story when there were, I think, 3 Quakers sitting in jail, waiting for a ship to come that would take them back to England. They would get them out of there, get them out of Massachusetts. That ship came in, they got on it and went back, but that ship had brought 5 Quakers with them. 5 came in, 3 went out. It was an impossible task, but they tried. In 1658, 2 Quakers had their ears cut off, 1 ear each cut off. What was their sin? They were Quakers. But in 1659, 1660, split over the December, January, 3 Quaker missionaries were hanged. What was their offense? They were dissenters. They didn't agree with some of the Puritan doctrines. That even bothered some other Puritans in Massachusetts, I must say, so that gave it some trouble anyway. All right. Eventually, England finally came into the picture, by the way, and got Massachusetts in 1681 to pass an act of toleration, which then did not restrict dissenters quite as much as they had before. But from 1645 to 1681, then, Baptists were not welcome in Massachusetts. Our Quakers weren't welcome there either. So, well, I think you can see then why Baptists historically have stressed religious liberty, religious freedom, or separation of church and state, because they suffered as a result of church and state being together, and they suffered because they were called dissenters, if you want. But they still had, even after this act of toleration, if you want, they still had to pay taxes to the Puritan church. They still couldn't hold certain jobs. They still couldn't teach in certain places. So they did not have religious liberty, if you wanted. During the Revolutionary War, many Baptists fought with the colonists. Not all, but many did. But then, as they were fighting with the colonists, they thought, this is interesting, because these colonists who are claiming for liberty from Britain also are denying us religious liberty here in Massachusetts. And that was true to him. Well, success regarding religious liberty finally came in Virginia in 1786 with the passage of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, written by Thomas Jefferson. And Jefferson said this is one of the 3 best things he ever did in his life. And this is what it said. If you know Jefferson's terminology, it runs on long. I have condensed it down to what it really said in. This said, no person shall be compelled to frequent or support any church, and all are free to worship as they see fit. This only in Virginia, though, but what a breakthrough. No person shall be compelled to frequent or support any church, no longer state church, and all are free to worship as they see fit, even if they don't believe in infant baptism. So there was no longer a church, a state church in Virginia, but that's Virginia only, no place else. Still have problems in Massachusetts and elsewhere, as you might guess anyway. Still trying to gain, still struggling there anyway. But there was a Massachusetts Constitution that was passed during the Revolutionary War, but it still didn't give religious freedom to groups. It still had the Puritan church, by the way, had become the Congregational church then by this time. So you still had to support the Congregational church. Then you finish the Revolution, and we have the Constitution a little bit later than the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. The Constitution did not guarantee religious freedom. It did not. And so a lot of groups opposed the Constitution, said, we don't want to vote for this. It doesn't guarantee us religious liberty, religious freedom. You can still have church and state. And James Madison came to the forefront, and he really wanted this new Constitution to get passed. And he said, I'll tell you what, he said this to delegates from several different states. If you will support this Constitution, I'll see it that we have a Bill of Rights that guarantees these freedoms you're talking about. And he kept his word. They didn't do it immediately. It bothered some people because the new Constitution went into effect, and we didn't get this Bill of Rights immediately, but he did get it. And here's what the First Amendment says anyway. Congress shall make no law requiring an establishment of religion or putting prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Boom. We now have religious freedom. We now have religious liberty. We no longer have church and state together. We have a separate. There's no state church anywhere after this anyway. And so the word dissenter to describe Baptists and Quakers and others goes out the dictionary. We no longer call these people dissenters. They have religious freedom. Finally, with the passage of the Constitution and the amendments. Well, let me fast forward. Can we do that? We can just right on through. This is not a history of Baptists, just focusing on those 3 points I said. Later in the 1800s and beginning of the 1900s, we've had Second Great Awakening. And when you had the Second Great Awakening, Baptists, and particularly Methodists, moved into the interior, into Tennessee and Kentucky and Western Virginia, Ohio, and finally into Indiana. They came in. In 1859, there were 12 people in Delaware County here who said, we should have a Baptist presence in Muncie. We had none. 1859, there was a Methodist church, Presbyterian church, and the Universalists had just begun earlier that year. And so in September 1859, those 12 people became the charter members of a Baptist church that began in Muncie and met for 2.5 years in the county courthouse. That church, of course, eventually became this church. That church moved straight through to the First Baptist Church, and here we are 156 years later. Now, to join this church, the history lesson's over. To join this church, and there's not one story about the Civil War. None. I mean, Dwayne asked me when I was going to do that. I have none to say. To join First Baptist, what you have to be is to have accepted Christ. You have to be a Christian and be baptized. That's it. Do you have to swear allegiance to 15 different points? No. How about 3 different points? No. How about 1 point? No. We have no creed. We have no confession of faith or that you have to agree to be a member of this church. To be a member of this church, you must be a Christian and have been baptized. Now, we don't say that you have to be baptized to be a Christian, but to join this church, you have to be baptized to join. And, of course, for years, we required you to be baptized as a believer. Now, you'd be baptized anyway, as long as it was a believer. You could be immersed as a believer, you could be poured as a believer, or sprinkled as a believer, but that's what we required anyway for many, many years. We do not anymore, but we did there anyway. So, the mode of baptism that we use here with this is strictly immersion. We only immerse unless a person is not able to be immersed, and then we can do it some other way. By the way, I should also tell you, to join this church, you have to be a Christian to be baptized. Well, you can transfer your membership in from another church, of course, where you met their requirements, and meet ours anyway. It's difficult to give you a list of Baptist beliefs. It is really difficult to do that because we believe all over the book. You see, Baptists, I say, have no creed, no standard confession of faith. And since there are more than 50 different Baptist denominations, I'm hesitant to say all Baptists believe thus and so. And some small Baptist groups may insist that you believe certain points before you can join their church. But for the most part, Baptist churches do not. And so with some reluctance and some uncertainty, let me list a few points I believe most Baptists believe. Look at those question marks. Commonly held beliefs, question mark. I could put 3 or 4 more question marks if you want to. One is the priesthood of all believers. That's Protestantism. That's when the Protestant movement came. It's the idea that we have direct access to God. You can pray to God. You can talk to God. God can talk to you. You do not have to go through a priest or through a preacher. Direct access. Priesthood of all believers. I suspect that virtually every one of you believes that. 2, autonomy of the local church. This church is independent. We call our pastor. Nobody tells us who's going to be our pastor. We decide where our money goes. We decide what service we have. We decide what our doctrines are, the theology we want. We do this on our own. We have that total autonomy. Now, we may join an association and cooperate with others, but we can withdraw from that or join that as we want. We have that option to do that if you want anyway. So, all right. Indeed, well, let me go on for that. Another point is separation of church and state. That's our whole background. That's Baptists from day one talked about religious liberty, and that required a separation of church and state. That is very much in our background. It is less prominent today in Baptists than it was almost any time before, because we are now getting involved with separation of church and state. Means no prayer in schools. That means no Christian symbols in the local county courthouse. Well, now, is that the way we want that or not? So we've got this kind of muddled. But let me tell you that Baptists are strong, hard believers in separation of church and state and religious liberty. We also believe in stress believers' baptism. That has been what made Baptists to begin with. Not everybody. Well, that's another point. Immersion is the correct form of baptism. We think that's a New Testament form. That is, most Baptists do. But let me point out that you can be a member of this church and not agree with a single one of those 5 points. Yes. So when you go out and talk to somebody about baptism, what do you believe? It's kind of hard to tell them what you believe. I know what I believe maybe, but maybe some other Baptists believe some. And so you might believe all 5 of those or none of those 5 and still be a very good member of this church. That's the way it is. And we love it that way, if you want to make some. In fact, 10 years ago, when Maynard Hatch was here, before Wade came, we changed our requirements to join this church. We changed our baptism requirements. And what we did, one in a business meeting, Jim, you remember that very well, I'm sure. We said, if you were baptized as an infant and then completed a catechism course, you could join our church without having to be baptized again. That's changing a lot. We had never done that before that I'm aware of. And we did that. And I think, and Jim can correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I think we did that not because we decided that infant baptism was the way they did it in the New Testament. I don't think that's what we decided. And I don't think we decided that because we had a lot of people out here who had been baptized as infants who wanted to join our church but wouldn't if they had to be rebaptized. I don't think that was the reason. I think the reason we did it is because we didn't think it was that important anymore. I think we thought, why keep people from joining this church if they wanted to? If they had been baptized and completed a catechism course, why keep them from joining? It just isn't that important anymore. The point of it is, we could do that. You see, this church can do that, and we did. And we can make other changes if we want to, if we decided that. We have that kind of authority, if you want to see. Yes, this is a Baptist church. We have 2 ordinances, or 2 rites, if you want anyway. We have the baptism, which I'll talk about anyway, when we do just baptize by immersion. And then we have the Lord's Supper. And we practice what is called open communion. We call it the Lord's Supper. We also call it communion. There are some people who say you can't call it one or the other. We do both. But open communion means if you're here when we're having a Lord's Supper and you're here and you're a Christian, you are invited, you are welcome to participate. I grew up in a church that wasn't true. I grew up in a church that said, you got to be a member of this church to take communion with us. In fact, we had communion on Thursday night. And who comes on Thursday night except members of the church? And I was in Hawaii preaching. I had a wonderful summer in Hawaii. It was a summer mission. I was preaching in Hawaii at First Baptist Church in Hawaii. And we had communion that night. And on the morning service, we'd have 150 people, 125 would be visitors. But Sunday night, we were there, and there were still maybe 50, 60 of us, and we didn't have a piano player. So this lady said she would play, and so she played for us. And I was still practicing or believing in closed communion. And I'm out here talking about closed communion, and I realize this woman can't take this communion. How ridiculous can that be? I mean, she has helped us get through this service, and I think I backed off it, but in my mind, I'm thinking, she can't do that. She can't take, what a ridiculous thing it is. So we have open communion, thank goodness. If you're here, you're a Christian, we invite you, we welcome you to participate. Well, we love the Lord. We love good preaching, we love good singing. We have a strong desire to win the lost to Christ and a strong desire to help people in need. Thank you for coming to this church. Amen. All right. That's my history lesson for the day. So, all right. Lindsay, are you going to sing for us? Is that what Lindsay's going to do? Our invitation is not the usual thing where you stand and sing a certain. Lindsay, I don't know who else is going to sing, truthfully. But the point is, if you would like to come up here and pray or want to join, this is a sermon where you could certainly, hey, I want to join this church. I've really kind of, told you a good reason to join this church, I hope, anyway. So we'd love to have you come and join this church. Or if you're not a Christian and you say, I want to trust the Lord as my Savior, that would be wonderful, too. If you would do this as we stand and sing or just sing?
Yes, please.
Stand and sing. Thank you.
Let us sing together.